What happens when a judge publicly mocks a black man standing up for his grandma? You won't believe how 10 quiet seconds turned a courtroom upside down. What happened next left the entire room in stunned silence. Before we begin the story, write in the comments where you are watching us from. You ever walk into a place and feel every eye hit you like cold rain? Eric felt it the second he stepped into that courthouse lobby, holding his grandma's tiny hand, trying to keep her steady while she whispered, "Baby, it's gonna be all right." Funny thing, she said that while her lips shook, her breath catching each step, like she was trying to believe her own words. Eric gave her a small nod, because that's what you do when you're trying to hold your family together, even when your own chest feels like a squeezed sponge. The metal detector squealed, and the security guard, a tall white man with a smirk that said, "I own this hallway," looked Eric up and down like he was scanning for reasons to feel bigger. Eric lifted his arms, forced a polite smile, and kept his focus on Grandma. They were here for one reason: save her home. See, Grandma had spent her life scrubbing floors and cleaning houses so other people's kids could run around in spotless living rooms. She paid her bills 1 penny at a time, but a messed-up electric bill and a crooked landlord trying to push her out meant this morning they had to beg a court for a little more time. Inside the courtroom, it smelled like stale coffee and cheap bleach. The judge, silver hair slicked back, leaned over the bench like he was doing the world a favor by sitting there. His glasses sat at the tip of his nose, eyes darting over paperwork, bored and half smiling like this was a morning game show. Eric helped Grandma sit down while people behind them shuffled, coughed, and whispered about their own troubles. Eric stood when their case was called, helped Grandma rise, and stepped forward. His hands were steady, but inside, his heart was a drum line. He cleared his throat, ready to speak for her, to explain that the bill would be paid in days, that she didn't deserve to lose her home over a few missed payments while she recovered from a bad fall. But the judge didn't even look up. He let out a dry chuckle, a sharp little laugh that echoed, and said, "Another one of these?" Like Grandma was a piece of trash he could flick off his table. Eric swallowed the burn in his throat. He looked down at his grandma, at her wrinkled hands clutching her purse, the one she had since the 70s with a button missing. She looked up at him, eyes glassy, nodding, telling him without words to speak. Eric spoke, clear, calm, every word a stone in that silent room. "Your Honor, we're only asking for a week to pay the bill. My grandma just needs a little time." The judge finally looked up, and the smirk returned. "Oh, you think you're a hero, son?" he said, voice dripping with amusement that didn't match the weight in Eric's chest. The people in the rows behind them shifted, a few uncomfortable, a few curious to see how this show would end. Eric didn't back down. "No, sir. I'm just asking for fairness." The judge laughed, actually laughed out loud, eyes scanning the room like he was waiting for others to join in. "Fairness," he repeated, the word rolling off his tongue like it was some joke. "Tell you what, young man, you've got 10 seconds to convince me why I shouldn't throw this case out right now." Eric felt the room freeze. 10 seconds. His grandma's breath caught, her hand tightening on his arm. The judge leaned back in his chair, still smirking, tapping a pen on the desk like this was entertainment for his morning boredom. And right there, standing in that stale courtroom, Eric felt the weight of it all, the weight of every hallway he had walked where people crossed the street, every store he had entered where eyes followed him like he didn't belong, every door that slammed in his face when he tried to help Grandma pay these bills. He looked the judge in the eye, breathing slow, steady, as the seconds started to count down. This wasn't just about an electric bill. This was about dignity, about telling a room full of people and a judge who thought he was untouchable that his grandma mattered. He took a step forward, refusing to let the fear show, his mind racing as the judge tapped 10, 9, 8. And that was the moment Eric realized this wasn't going to be just another morning in court. What happened next changed everything. You do not want to miss how this unfolded. 10 seconds. That judge said it like he was tossing scraps to a dog, leaning back with that half smile, tapping his pen, eyes flicking to the clock. 10, 9, he started, slow, like he enjoyed the count more than anything else that morning. Eric felt the heat rise in his chest. He wasn't shaking, but every muscle in his body felt tight, like a rope pulled too far. Grandma's hand trembled in his, her eyes big, searching his face for hope. The room was so quiet you could hear the flicker of the cheap fluorescent lights. 8, 7. Eric thought about how Grandma used to walk him to school, her hand warm, telling him to stand tall, to look people in the eye. She taught him to carry himself with dignity, even when folks looked through him like he was invisible, even when they stepped around him in store aisles like he was in the way. 6. The judge cleared his throat, leaning forward just a bit, that smirk growing, thinking this was funny. Like Eric was just another case on a long list he could sweep off the table before lunch. 5. Eric stepped forward, voice steady. Your Honor, my grandma has worked her whole life to keep that home. She fell, she's been recovering, and we will pay the bill in a week. 4. Someone in the back shifted, a soft cough breaking the silence. A young woman lowered her phone, eyes fixed on Eric. 3. The judge rolled his eyes. That's your argument? You think you deserve special treatment? 2. Eric didn't flinch. No, sir. We're asking for respect. 1. The judge paused, pen hovering over the paper, lips twisted like he was about to let out a final laugh. Time's up. He brought the pen down, but before it could touch the paper, the courtroom door swung open with a loud echo, hitting the wall hard enough to snap heads around. A man in a dark suit stepped in, crisp, calm, moving with the kind of energy that makes people straighten their backs without realizing. Eric turned, chest still tight, eyes locked on the man who stepped closer, flashing a badge that glinted under the courtroom lights. The judge's pen froze just above the paper, that smirk flickering for the first time. The man's voice was calm but firm, cutting through the thick air. Your Honor, before you continue, I need to speak. People in the back row were whispering, trying to see what was happening. Grandma's hand tightened around Eric's wrist. Her breath held as she looked between the suited man and the judge. The judge cleared his throat, sitting up straighter, trying to find that smirk again. And you are? The man opened a folder, pulling out a single paper, sliding it across the table to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. The judge's eyes scanned it, and for the first time that morning, his face changed. The smirk dropped, replaced with a tight line, his eyes darting between the paper and Eric. Eric could feel the room shift, like the air itself was waiting to see what would happen next. His hands were still, but inside, his mind was racing. He glanced at Grandma, whose eyes were now locked on the judge, silent but fierce. The judge set the paper down, cleared his throat again, and adjusted his glasses. "We will take a brief recess," he said, voice softer, almost unsure, before he stood up, moving quickly toward his chambers. People in the courtroom erupted in whispers, the tension breaking like a wave. Eric turned to Grandma, who exhaled, her shoulders dropping, her hand still gripping his. The man in the suit nodded to Eric, a quiet sign of acknowledgement that felt heavier than words. Eric didn't know who he was or why he was there, but in that moment, he realized this fight wasn't just his anymore. Eric looked around, seeing the faces in the courtroom, some curious, some supportive, others just hungry for drama, but it didn't matter. He had stood up, he had spoken, and he had refused to back down, even when the system tried to laugh him out of the room. And for the first time in a long time, Eric felt that tight rope inside him loosen, just a little. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay tuned to see how the hero makes them all face the truth. Eric stood there, feeling every heartbeat in his chest like a drum against iron, as the judge disappeared behind that door. The courtroom felt different now. The whispers, the shifting feet, the uneasy eyes, everyone could sense it. Grandma's hand was still wrapped around Eric's wrist, but her grip had softened. She looked at him, those tired eyes still holding that fierce light he'd seen when she walked him to school, telling him to stand tall when people stared at them on the sidewalk. The man in the dark suit leaned closer, speaking low, steady. "You did good," he said, and his voice carried weight, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. Eric didn't know who this man was, but right then, it felt like someone finally saw what was happening, someone who wouldn't look away. A few minutes passed, slow and heavy, before the door swung open again. The judge walked back in, but that smirk? Gone. His eyes weren't dancing around the room like before. They were locked on Eric, steady, searching, almost like he was trying to figure out what to say now that the joke wasn't funny anymore. People in the room leaned forward, the air crackling, waiting. The judge cleared his throat, placed his hands on the desk, and for a moment, his eyes flickered to Grandma. She straightened up, chin lifting, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I've reviewed the information presented," the judge said, his voice quieter, more careful now. "Given the circumstances, I will grant a postponement." The words didn't hit Eric immediately. It was like the room held its breath, waiting for confirmation that they had heard it right. Eric blinked, his hands tightening around Grandma's as her eyes filled with tears. Not from fear this time, but from relief. The judge's eyes dropped, and he shuffled the papers on his desk, clearing his throat again. "Your payment extension is granted, and the eviction notice is delayed. You have 30 days to resolve the matter." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Eric felt the rope in his chest snap loose, letting air rush in for the first time in what felt like forever. He turned to Grandma, who let out a small, shaky laugh, her shoulders shaking as she held on to him. The man in the suit gave a small nod, then stepped back quietly, blending into the background as fast as he had appeared. As they turned to leave, Eric caught a glimpse of the judge's face. It wasn't smug anymore. It was the face of a man who had been reminded that the people standing in front of him were not just case numbers on a docket, but people with lives, histories, and dignity. Walking down that aisle, people in the seats gave small nods, a hand on a heart, a quiet, good job as Eric and Grandma passed. Eric felt taller, stronger, like every step was breaking chains he didn't even realize he had been carrying. Outside the courtroom, the air smelled fresher. Grandma wiped her eyes, looking up at Eric with that soft, proud smile that spoke more than words ever could. "You did it, baby," she whispered. Eric looked up at the sky, letting the morning sun hit his face, feeling the warmth, letting it remind him that sometimes standing up, even when your voice shakes, is the only way to change the room. And he didn't need the judge's approval for that. He had his grandma, his courage, and his voice. This was justice in action. Never forget. Standing up for what's right changes more than one life. Stay tuned for more stories that prove it.